Hi, friends, and welcome back to the Smart Catholics show. I'm pleased to be joined today by Father Matthew Bartow from EWTN. We've got 4 topics we want to have a look at this week. It's been a busy week for the Holy Father. We've had millions of youth showing up to a jubilee for youth. And if you're like me, you're not following the news. We're going to get the lowdown from Father and his take on things, and I'm genuinely showing up to learn what's been going on in the Catholic news of late. So we've got the Jubilee. We're going to talk about the issue of migration, and then lastly, the Holy Father's thoughts on a firmer foundation for global security. So thank you, Father, for joining us. Hope you've had a good week, and talk to us about this Jubilee. I saw the photo on Twitter of like millions? I don't know, at least 1 million young people gathered together to meet up with the Holy Father. For those who have completely missed what's been going on because you don't watch the news, like me, what happened?
Sure. So, as many of us have hopefully heard by now, the Vatican, Pope Leo XIV has hosted a Jubilee for youth, and I think originally they were expecting maybe several
A
thousand,
few 100,000,
hundreds of
maybe?
thousands maybe that would come for this Jubilee. And basically, for the closing mass of the Jubilee, they had over 1 million
Gosh.
young people that showed up for
And
this mass.
this is not World Youth Day, right? This is
This is not World Youth Day,
okay.
no. So it's pretty incredible that they had such a turnout for this, and I think it was held at Tor Vergata Field in Rome. That the closing mass, and the Holy Father, of course, celebrated mass there and delivered the homily, and it basically was just giving a basic teaching to the youth there, and using Saint Augustine, as of course you could say like a typical young person, who had his own struggles, his own issues in his youth, and had to wrestle with those things, and was able to find something that was superior just to the material goods, of this earth. He says, I'm basically paraphrasing Pope Leo, but he talks about the beauty of the earth, the beauty of creation, the beauty of created things, and that we have the enjoyment of these things, and that these are gifts from God. But often what happens is we forget about the one who gave us these things, the giver of these things, and we're often so caught up in material possessions that we forget about what is transcendent, to that. And so that's basically what the Holy Father's message, or his encouragement to young people, is to always never forget about that, to never forget about what transcends these material goods, because we don't find our happiness in an abundance of goods, in the giver of those goods, the giver of all good gifts, and especially the greatest gift of all. We talk about the church, the Holy Spirit, the Holy Eucharist, the gift of Christ himself. And so it's important for us to remember these things, and to basically turn every moment of our lives into thanksgiving, and blessing, and to try to bring that message into the world. So there's a beautiful message, from the Holy Father.
I think that's
So
pretty stunning.
yeah,
What was the advance notice on this? Because I know World Youth Day is promoted for like a long time, and there's a big lead up to it. But for 1 million young people to show up for a final mass, I guess maybe it was better advertised over in Italy or over in Europe.
yeah, I believe they've known about this for quite a while, that this was coming up, and it gave young people, and I'm sure they had different groups of parishes and schools and things like that were able to organize for them to come. But I'm sure the Vatican didn't actually get formal contact from people, or formal registration from people coming, and so they basically would guesstimate how many people were coming for the event.
Yeah, yeah.
It turned out to be a whole lot more than they were expecting.
Well, I'm
So I
trying
guess
to
especially
imagine
with
all the
having a new
restaurants
pope.
in that area
I
just
know,
like
right?
running out.
Exactly.
Amazing.
And I believe that for the closing mass for World Youth Day in Rio, there was around 3 million people that were there for that. So
A huge number.
to have a
Number, yeah.
third of that come, and it's not even a World Youth Day. This is just the Jubilee of Youth is, and this is something that I believe they have been talking about for months. And they had been planning this for months ahead of time. But it's still really impressive, to see
What was
this.
the inspiration? What was the goal, the desire of this event? Do you know?
I don't know specifically what the inspiration is, but I believe that Pope Leo XIV is continuing, of course, with the program of Pope Francis. Pope Francis. One of the things that he had really emphasized during his pontificate was bridging this gap between the elderly and young people. And he could see that there was this disconnect, and I mean, I've even seen it in my own life. I didn't really even meet my grandparents until I was a teenager. So there was this, there is this disconnect that takes place, and um, so Pope Francis was reaching out to the youth, and recognizing that it's in the youth that we see our future. This is the future of the church, the future of the world, and that they are, as Pope Leo XIV has said, they're pilgrims of hope. They're the hope that um, that different world is possible. Because oftentimes, older people, they tend to get set in their ways, and it's more difficult to be able to change their minds on certain things once they get fixed on certain ways of thinking. But the youth are still, they're still malleable. They're still able to be formed in a particular way, and they're still able to accept the truth that is presented to them. They have this openness to the truth, hopefully. And so the Pope Francis recognized this, and then Pope Leo is basically continuing with that program of Pope Francis, I believe. They had a couple of synods on the youth, during Pope Francis's pontificate. He, issued a document that was directed to the youth. It was a post synodal apostolic exhortation, Christus Vivit, that was written specifically for young people. And so, I believe that Pope Leo, being completely in line with his predecessor, and we're seeing this in many different ways, especially with the environment and immigration, all these different these issues that were very dear to Pope Francis. Pope Leo is now continuing to develop, what Pope Francis had initiated, I believe.
That's amazing. I had not heard of that exhortation. Can you give us a quick overview of what he was exhorting to the youth, if you remember?
Actually, I'm not prepared for that. I did read it, but it's been a year since
I
I
need to
read
look
that
it up.
one. So
I didn't know that was a thing.
yeah,
So that would be wonderful
sure.
to read. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
You had mentioned that talking about stewarding the goods of the earth and Pilgrims of Hope and all this, you have a project that you've been working on yourself, and about the church's position or attitude towards migration, or her guidance and Catholic social teaching towards migration around the world. And I remember Pope Francis has been uh, just very, very deeply moved and challenged by some of the pretty brutal migration or immigrant experiences that happen right on his doorstep, like that horrible famous photo of a little child that washed up on the beach. And here in the United States, it's an ongoing concern, question, debate about what the appropriate way to handle it. And so you had been putting some thoughts together, and I wondered if you could walk us through an overview, like a 101 refresher on this topic that most of us just don't get when it comes to punching into Sunday Mass and trying to get back to work on Monday. Yeah, how are you putting this together and presenting this for your article?
Sure. Well, the just recently there was a very sad situation that took place, and this was off the coast of Yemen, where there were some Ethiopian migrants that were sailing towards Yemen, and unfortunately they got into a shipwreck, and there were over 100 people. There was 157 people that were believed to be on board. They've confirmed that 76 people have died, and that there's still a good number of people that are missing. I believe it was 32. There's 32 survivors, and there's still dozens that are missing. And apparently, this is something that happens quite regularly in this area, where people, are migrating and being shipped over. And they've actually called this route the route of death, because it has happened, so many times, unfortunately. And so, Pope Leo had, issued some words of comfort and deep sorrow over the shipwreck has taken place. And this continues with this theme of Pope Francis, where he was very concerned with the situation for migrants throughout the world. I mean, famously, he had issued that letter to the United States bishops, encouraging the bishops to continue to speak up for migrants, coming to the United States, to advocate for just and merciful immigration policy. But of course, we know this is at least in the United States, it's a very hot button issue, among many different people. And it's not just an issue that's in the United States. It's a worldwide issue, as you can see, from the shipwreck that took place, off the coast of Yemen. There's many people that just around the world that are put in harm's way all the time. And it's something that I've wanted to bring the church's teaching to this situation, because I think there's a lot of confusion on what the church teaches about this topic. One thing that I think we need to always keep in mind is that it is a complicated issue. There's a lot of different factors that go into this. There's some truth to what people say about, countries have the right to regulate their borders. There's also truth to the fact that people have the right to migrate, and people also, and that immigration policy should be fashioned in such a way that it is just and merciful. And in the process of writing an article for our website and also for our social media, that basically will lay out the church's teaching. And this is drawn from the Catholic social teaching, which is an extension of the church's moral teaching. So you'll find in Catholic social teaching, the church's moral teaching is contained there, and that the church's moral teaching is part of magisterial teaching. So it's not something that's just optional for us as Catholics, to adhere to, but that we're required to adhere to the church's moral teaching. But oftentimes people aren't familiar, with the church's moral teaching. So that's what I wanted to bring in was, what is it that the church actually teaches, on immigration, and how it should be regulated? And then how can we use that to shape our public policy in such a way where, we're not only protecting our borders or we're protecting the citizens that live in a particular country, but we're also protecting the migrants that come to us, and we're facilitating their needs as well, that we're concerned for their own well-being, for their own safety, and that we're enacting policy that will, reflect the church's principles. So that's currently what I'm working on. And according to the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, the church basically has three principles that need to be followed with immigration policy. First is the right to migrate. So this is something that is basic. This is something that was affirmed by Pope Pius XII as being a basic right. It's something that is based in natural law. And this really follows from people who are faced with situations in their particular countries where they're no longer able to provide for the needs of themselves or their families. Maybe they're faced with a situation of violence. They need to get out of there and they need to find a place where they can seek refuge. So, there's different situations where it might be necessary for a person to migrate. And of course, Pope Francis had recently, or, before he passed away, had affirmed that a person also has a right not to migrate, and that a person's country, should be so organized that they wouldn't have to migrate. So if there's a situation of unrest that's taking place in their country, then something needs to be done to be able to, bring peace to that situation. That's that way that person could stay there and that family could stay there. But when that's not possible, then the person has the right to migrate. So that's always the primary focus. But then there's also the second principle where the church also affirms that the country who's receiving migrants has the right to, regulate their borders and to control their borders and to protect their citizens. Now, this doesn't mean that every single person who's coming to the country is an invader or is an attacker, which is often the rhetoric that's used about the immigrants that come here, but that we have the right to be able to, vet these people who come, to be able to, we do have to provide for them, so they are at our doorstep. We can't just say, well, sorry, there's nothing that we can do for you, and just kind of leave them on their own. It's like these people are in need and we need to be able to assist them in some way. But it may not be possible for us to take them in. Sometimes immigrants might come to a country, but they don't have the resources to be able to, provide for different immigrants. So it really depends on the country that they're coming to, but the church takes that into consideration, with her teaching. But it's all about the language that we use, with immigrants, that we don't refer to them as attackers or as invaders, things like that. But these are human beings, with the basic human dignity, that they are equal to the citizens of the country that they're coming to. Oftentimes the language that we use makes it seem like, citizens have more rights than, the foreigners that come to us. But the fact of the matter is we're all equal in the eyes of God. We're all equal in dignity, and that these people also have the right to be treated, as human beings. And then, of course, the third principle is that the immigration policy should be designed in such a way that principles of justice and mercy are observed, in the policy. And so that becomes a good way to evaluate the policy of a particular country. And if it's not living up to those principles, then we need to advocate for changes in those policies. That way they're more in line with Catholic teaching.
Yeah. Goodness. Thank you. When do you plan to publish this to the website so that we can direct people over to it? And maybe it'll happen by the time this video ends.
Yeah, I'm hoping by next week I'll have the article completed. So I'm hoping by maybe this Saturday or maybe on Monday, to have the article completed. It's not going to be a very long article, and I'm relying, mostly on the USCCB document, which is a very good document, and I'll have the link to that document and the article as well, so people can see it for themselves. But it's all based on principles that are drawn from Catholic social teaching. Yeah, I think it's important for all of us to know.
Well, when it's done, maybe you can also come back and share it in the Smart Catholics community. I'm sure we'd
Sure.
enjoy and appreciate having a
Sure, we'll
primer
do.
like that. And then if it's not linked in this video, friends, you can jump on over to the Smart Catholics community, and Father's post will probably show up around the time that this video shows up. So cool. Well, let's move over to the last, talking about justice and mercy and care for the human family, better relations with each other. You talked about Pope Leo continuing to advocate for a firmer foundation for global security. And I'm curious to, I mean, that just seems like a paramount thing for the world leaders and for the different countries to be working towards. What's your read on how he's approaching this conversation, and what guidelines perhaps, or what stances is he advocating, so that we're aware of that?
Sure. So this is based on remarks that Pope Leo had given on the anniversary of the bombing of the Japanese city of Hiroshima. Of course, this took place on August 6th, 1945. So yesterday was the 80th anniversary of this bombing. Obviously not something that we're celebrating, something that we're mourning. So in his remarks for this day, he was basically calling for, first of all, he was bringing up the fact that world peace, so to speak, is pretty much based on this notion of what we call mutually assured destruction, where, pretty much all of these different major countries have, possession of nuclear weapons. And the only reason why we're not completely obliterating each other is because, we don't want to be obliterated at the same time. And what Pope Leo is saying is that this is a false sense of security. This is not, something that we can really base a lasting security and peace upon. But that's he's calling for, justice, for open dialogue, and for fraternity. And of course, it has been, the position of the Church, and especially of Pope Francis, who literally had called for disarmament. That he's looking for. Eventually we can get to the point where countries will begin to remove the weapons, and not just the nuclear weapons, but, the other weapons of mass destruction that, many of us possess, and that we can base our peace and our security upon something that is more lasting, which is fraternity, which is this open dialogue between nations that we're able to, especially since we have this modern technology, we have the ability to be able to move resources around the world, that we can actually find ways to be able to facilitate worldwide trade, whatever it is that it takes to be able to get resources to people in different situations, and to basically reestablish the economy, which is often based upon profit and upon, making a lot of money, basing it on the human person. And this is also a part of Catholic social teaching. So this is not something that, Pope Francis just made up, out of whole cloth, but, something that he's drawn from Catholic social teaching. And then, of course, Pope Leo is continuing with the same theme. So I know I say that over and over again, but I think it's important to point out the fact that, Pope Leo XIV is really the successor
Clear
to,
continuation.
Pope Francis. He's in continuation, exactly, with Pope Francis. So
I can so easily see how people will look at calls like that from the Holy Father, and it just it's a lone voice crying in the wilderness. And it's probably the kind of thing that's going to need to be happening for a long time before the human family can catch up to why this is a more humane and a better way to live. But it's also something that trickles down to us, the decisions that we make, how we choose to interact, how we vote, how we form our children and ourselves around, like you say, an ideal, not just an ideal world, but the kind of future that we want to build and that we believe in is one that is not made safe by mutually assured destruction.
right.
But one where, like you say, immigrants don't have a urgency to escape war-torn situations or traumatizing, situations for their families or for themselves, but where we can thrive and thrive together.
Sure. I think what's important to remember is to always, or to think about, is to consider ourselves being in the same situation as well. So, if we're, in a situation where the United States, God forbid, gets into a situation where we need to leave the country, how would we want to be treated when we go to other countries, to seek refuge from them? Would we want to be treated the same way that we treat people when they come here. When we want it to be some sort of unit to come and hunt us down and to throw us out of the country simply because we're just trying to find safety in another country. And it goes to show that the way that we treat others is a reflection upon the way that we want to be treated ourselves. As Jesus says with the golden rule, do unto others as you would have others do unto you. It also goes the other way. Do not unto others as you would not want others to do unto you. And that's an important rule for us to keep in mind. And the same goes also with trying to establish a more solid foundation for worldwide peace, for cooperation among nations, that there really needs to be more of this fraternal collaboration that takes place between nations. And this is why the Vatican and the Holy Father, going back from its foundation, is usually very supportive of the United Nations. It's not to say that everything that comes from the United Nations is good, or that that they approve of every single decision that they make, or they think everything is running smoothly, things like that. That's not to say that there isn't issues with the United Nations, but the idea behind it, the fact that there is this cooperation that's taking place, and that there's this international organization that is taking place between different nations, and that's not just based on war, that's not just based on mutual protection like in NATO, things like that, but it's actually based on trying to preserve peace and justice in different parts of the world. The Pope and the Church is going to work with whatever resources are available in the world to try to encourage this kind of dialogue and fraternity among people.
Amazing. Father, this was really a very helpful conversation for me. Thanks for walking us through. So those 3 topics from this past week, I imagine it's been a very busy week for the Holy Father. Any closing thoughts that you'd like to share with us after a week of reflection and homilies and such on all of this?
Sure. I think there was one thing that Pope Francis, or not, sorry, Pope Leo had mentioned in his Wednesday audience this past Wednesday, where he was talking about how he had sent the disciples to go and prepare to eat the Passover in the upper room. But as it turned out, Jesus had already pretty much arranged everything ahead of time, and he just gave them specific instructions of what to do. But there's this fact that Jesus already has his purposes, but he wants to incorporate all of us into that. And oftentimes we have this tendency to want to try to take control and to try to do our own thing, and maybe we try to do too much and take too much onto ourselves. And the Holy Father is basically inviting us to reflect upon that, to have a greater trust in the Lord and in his providence, but also to discern what it is that Jesus is calling us to do, and then to set aside those things that might be a little bit too much, and to try to simplify things in some way as well. So it was basically an invitation to greater trust in divine providence and in his plan for salvation. So
thank you. I don't think I'm going to forget that. That's actually pretty hilarious. He sets up everything and
right.
handles everything, handles all the details. How he does it without them knowing is another question. And then he says, now you guys, you get the donkey. That's it. You can't mess that up.
And you got to find this man who is carrying a water jug,
Yeah. I even tell you exactly what he's doing so that you don't get the wrong donkey. Okay. Friends, thanks for joining us in this conversation. If anything from this was helpful to you, please hit the like button and say hi in the comments. It's always wonderful to spend the time with you. And if you haven't yet, come and join us in Smart Catholics. It's this free community that we're building for those who want to learn how to study the popes and do it in a place where we don't savage each other looking at you, Catholic Twitter. It's free of trolls and ads and toxicity. We work hard to keep it that way. And we would love for you to join us if this is the kind of conversation and community that speaks to you. Please say a prayer for us and for each other. And let's study the popes and pay attention to what the Holy Father's got going on. God bless you.